I'm Amber, and I never imagined that I would be the one to break off relations with my family. However, life has a way of revealing people's true selves, particularly at what ought to be the happiest times. 3 years ago, while I was working as an event coordinator at a computer conference, I met James. He was calm, considerate, and very smart, which set him apart from the men I typically dated. Like the rest of my family, I had always been the life of the party, but there was something about his collected manner that appealed to me. I fell in love with him right away because of the way his eyes glowed when he described his projects. He was a senior programmer at a big computer business. My younger sister Rachel would constantly remind me, "You're nothing alike," when we first started dating. He barely says 2 words at family dinners. Despite the fact that she was 5 years younger than me, she constantly seemed to be an expert on relationships. Tom and Linda, our parents, weren't any better. "Honey, are you sure about him?" Every time James left the room, Mom would inquire. "He seems so distant." I made numerous attempts to clarify that James was simply introverted and not distant. He liked serious conversations over small banter and intimate get-togethers over big celebrations. However, my family never made an effort to comprehend. They interpreted his introversion as a personal attack against them and his stillness as conceit. A year ago, James and I were married in spite of their opposition. It was a modest ceremony that we both desired. Although my family was present, they mostly used passive-aggressive remarks to point out how different this wedding was from other family weddings. "I don't understand why they can't accept you for who you are," I said James one evening following yet another unpleasant family meal. He simply shrugged and grinned his soft smile. "Amber, not everyone has to comprehend me, so long as you do." His ability to remain above the drama and not let other people's opinions influence him was what I admired most about him. However, things were going to get a lot worse, and even his composure would be put to the test. It all began last weekend when Mom called. "Next Saturday is our family supper, Amber, my love. But only you. We are aware that James dislikes these get-togethers." My blood pressure started to rise. "What do you mean, just me?" "Well," Mom said hesitantly, her voice dropping off, "you know how James is with crowds, and we're having some relatives around. We believed it would be preferable if—" "Mom, what if?" "If I pretended to be single during family events, and my hubby stayed at home." "I'm sorry, Mom, but my husband will be joining me." "Marriage does not operate that way." My hands trembling with rage, I hung up before she could answer. James simply chuckled when I later told him about it. When Rachel contacted me one bright morning, everything changed. I could almost feel her leaping up and down over the phone, and her voice was brimming with enthusiasm. "Oh my God, Amber, you won't believe it. Last night, Mark proposed," she said. My heart jumped with real delight. I knew how much my sister loved Mark, and I loved her despite our differences. He was a high school teacher who shared Rachel's gregarious nature and enjoyment of social events, and they had been dating for more than 2 years. He appeared like a decent guy. "Rachel, that's incredible." I said, "I'm so happy for you," as I reached for my car keys. "Are you at Mom and Dad's?" "Yes, we're beginning to organize everything, so come on over now." After 20 minutes, I was entering the well-known living room of my parents. Rachel's engagement ring caught the light as she rushed to embrace me. Mark stood close by, looking proud and a little overwhelmed, while Mom and Dad were grinning. "Show me the ring." When I insisted, Rachel proudly showed off the small but exquisite diamond. We talked about dates and looked through wedding publications for the next hour. Then Mom's face became serious. She stated, "The only issue is, well, we're a bit tight on money right now," with an uneasy expression. with Dad's recent medical bills and everything. Despite her best efforts to conceal it, I saw Rachel's face droop a little. I heard myself respond without hesitation, "I'll give you $10,000 for the wedding." Rachel threw herself at me, her embrace almost toppling me. "Oh my God, Amber, thank you, thank you, thank you." Mom and Dad appeared impressed as well. Mom remarked, "That's incredibly generous of you, honey," and for once, she seemed sincere. James and I were eating dinner in our kitchen later that night when I told him everything. I was taken aback by his reaction. "I have an idea," he said, putting down his fork. "What if we also get them tickets to the Maldives for their honeymoon as a surprise gift at the wedding?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. The Maldives? But that would cost about $20,000. "I know," he finished. "I'll use my personal savings. I've been thinking about what you said about building bridges with your family. Maybe this could help them see me differently." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was the man my family thought was cold and arrogant, offering to spend his own savings to give my sister her dream honeymoon. "Are you sure?" I asked, still stunned by his generosity. He smiled and pulled me into a hug. "Absolutely. But let's keep it a secret until the wedding. It'll make it more special." That night, as I lay in bed thinking about everything, I felt hopeful for the first time in ages. Maybe this would finally help my family see James for who he really was, not the antisocial person they'd labeled him as, but the incredibly thoughtful, generous man I'd fallen in love with. The months leading up to Rachel's wedding flew by in a whirlwind of planning and preparations. Every weekend seemed to bring a new decision to make, and Rachel wanted my opinion on everything. I was touched that she valued my input. "What do you think about this venue?" Rachel asked one Saturday, showing me pictures of an elegant converted warehouse. "It's smaller than the country club Mom suggested, but I think it has more character." "I love it," I said honestly. "Plus, it'll probably cost half as much." Rachel nodded, chewing her lip. "That's what I was thinking. Mark and I want to keep things simple. No more than 50 guests. We're both trying to be practical about money." I admired her approach. Unlike some brides who went crazy with expensive demands, Rachel was being surprisingly sensible. We spent hours comparing flower arrangements, tasting different menu options, and visiting dress shops, always with an eye on the budget. "You don't think it's too plain?" she asked, twirling in a sleek, minimalist wedding dress that cost a fraction of what Mom had expected her to spend. "It's perfect," I assured her. Sometimes less is more. Every time we made another decision or checked another item off the list, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about the surprise waiting for them. James would occasionally ask how the planning was going, and I'd catch him grinning when I mentioned Rachel's offhand comments about wanting to travel someday. "I can't wait to see their faces," he said one evening. "Have you looked at the resort photos I sent you? The overwater bungalow is going to blow their minds." His enthusiasm made me fall in love with him all over again. Here was my antisocial husband, genuinely excited about giving my sister and her fiancé the honeymoon of their dreams. But as the wedding date grew closer, something started nagging at me. 2 weeks before the big day, I realized what it was. We still hadn't received our invitation. At first, I tried to brush it off. Rachel had been so busy with preparations, and she'd involved me in every detail of the planning. Surely it was just an oversight. Still, something felt off. James and I had our outfits ready, we'd arranged time off work, and we'd been actively involved in all the planning, but we didn't have an actual invitation. After a particularly restless night thinking about it, I decided to stop by my parents' house after work to ask Rachel directly. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw both my parents' cars and Rachel's beat-up Honda. Perfect, everyone would be there. I grabbed my purse and headed to the front door, still telling myself I was probably worried about nothing. After all, we'd been instrumental in planning this whole wedding. There had to be a simple explanation for the missing invitation. I walked into my parents' living room, trying to keep my voice casual. "Hey, Rachel, I wanted to ask you something. James and I haven't received our invitation yet. I'm sure it just got lost in the mail or something." Rachel shifted uncomfortably on the couch, glancing at our parents before answering. "Oh, actually, I wanted to give it to you in person." She reached into her purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, handing it to me with what I now recognize was forced enthusiasm. "Here you go." My hands were shaking slightly as I opened it. The invitation was beautiful, elegant script on thick paper, exactly the style we'd picked out together. But as I read the words, my stomach dropped. There was only one name on it. Mine. "Rachel," I said slowly, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Why isn't James's name on this?" She straightened up, and I saw something change in her expression. Gone was the hesitation, replaced by a defiant look I'd seen many times when we were kids, just before she did something she knew was wrong. "Well," she said, glancing at our parents again for support, "we decided to keep the guest list really tight. You know, only the absolute closest people." I felt like I'd been slapped. Closest people. James is my husband. Heck, your brother-in-law. "Come on, Amber," Rachel said, rolling her eyes. "We all know he's not really family. He never tries to be part of anything." I turned to our parents, expecting, hoping, they would say something to correct this insanity. But Mom just sat there nodding, while Dad wouldn't even meet my eyes. "We support Rachel's decision," Mom said firmly. "Your husband doesn't enjoy these kinds of events anyway. He always looks so miserable at family gatherings." "That's not true," I protested, but Dad cut me off. "Be reasonable, Amber. He'll just sit there with that sad face of his the whole time, making everyone uncomfortable." Besides, he added, as if this was the clincher, "this way, Rachel can save some money on the catering." "Save money?" I repeated incredulously. "You're talking about excluding my husband to save money on a plate of food." "It's my wedding," Rachel said, crossing her arms. "I get to decide who comes, and I don't want him there bringing down the mood. He can stay home and code, or whatever it is he does." I stood there, looking at these three people I'd known my whole life, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. How could they sit there and so casually exclude my husband? Act like he was some random acquaintance rather than family. The worst part was seeing how rehearsed it all seemed. They clearly discussed this before, prepared their arguments, and agreed among themselves that this was perfectly reasonable. While my husband had been spending his savings on their dream honeymoon, they'd been plotting to exclude him. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want to exclude my husband to save money on the wedding that I gave you $10,000 for. $10,000 that I handed over without any conditions or expectations." Rachel's smug expression faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Well, that was different. You're my sister. And James is your brother-in-law." I cut her off. "But you know what's really ironic about all this? James has spent the last 3 months planning a surprise for you. He was going to give you and Mark an all-expenses-paid honeymoon trip to the Maldives. $20,000 worth of luxury resort, overwater bungalow, first-class flights, everything." The room went dead silent. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's jaw dropped. Rachel's face went through a rapid series of expressions: disbelief, shock, and then something that made my stomach turn: calculation. The Maldives. Rachel's voice had completely changed, becoming sweet and conciliatory. "Oh my God, Amber, I was just kidding about the invitation thing. Of course James is invited. Here, let me fix the card right now." She reached for her purse, pulling out a pen. I stepped back, physically recoiling from her sudden change in attitude. "Don't bother. The trip is canceled." "What?" "No." Rachel jumped up. "Come on, I said I was joking. Don't be so sensitive." "Honey," Mom stepped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Your sister was just stressed about the wedding planning. You know how brides can be. Of course we want James there." Dad nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. He's family." I looked at their faces, faces I'd known and loved my whole life, and felt nothing but disgust. 5 minutes ago, they'd been united in excluding my husband. Now, at the mention of an expensive gift, they were falling all over themselves to backtrack. "You're right, Dad. He is family," I said, "which is why I'm not going to let you treat him like this." I turned and walked toward the door, ignoring their protests. The drive home was a blur. When I walked through our front door, James took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. We sat on our couch as I told him everything. The invitation, their excuses, their sudden change of heart when they learned about the Maldives trip. James listened quietly, his face calm as always, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He'd spent months planning this surprise, genuinely excited about giving Rachel and Mark this gift, and they couldn't even be bothered to invite him to the wedding. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "Cancel the trip," I said without hesitation. "And I'm not going to the wedding. I can't sit there and celebrate with people who treat you like this." "Are you sure? They're your family." I shook my head firmly. "You're my family, and I won't let anyone treat my family like this." James nodded, opened his laptop, and within minutes had canceled the Maldives reservation. The money was immediately refunded to his account. As I watched the transaction complete, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. That evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First came the calls, Rachel's name flashing on my screen every few minutes, alternating with Mom and Dad's. I silenced them all. Then the messages started flooding in. "Please don't do this to me," Rachel texted. "The Maldives has always been my dream." "Sweetheart, let's talk about this rationally," Mom wrote. "Don't make any hasty decisions about the trip. Think about your sister's happiness," Dad chimed in. As I scrolled through their messages, something became crystal clear. Not one of them mentioned James. Not one expressed regret for trying to exclude him from the wedding. Not one acknowledged how hurtful their actions had been. Every single message focused on one thing: the canceled honeymoon. "You can't cancel the Maldives trip," Rachel's next message read. "We already told Mark's parents about it." I felt a cold laugh escape my throat. Of course they had. They probably started bragging about their luxury honeymoon the moment I left the house. "The trip is already canceled," I typed back. "The money has been refunded. Don't contact me again." Then I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I blocked my sister's number, and my parents' numbers too, for good measure. James and I spent the rest of the evening watching movies on the couch, trying to pretend everything was normal. But the next morning, our peaceful Saturday was shattered by loud banging on our front door. Before we could even respond, the door burst open. My parents must have used their emergency key, the one I'd given them years ago for actual emergencies. Rachel stormed in first, followed by Mom and Dad. They didn't bother with hellos or explanations. "How dare you cancel our honeymoon?" Rachel screamed, her face red with anger. "You have to reinstate it right now." "Calm down," James said, standing up from the couch. "You can't just burst into our house like this." They ignored him completely, as if he wasn't even there. "Do you know how embarrassing this is?" Mom demanded, after we already told everyone about the Maldives. "Fix this right now," Dad ordered, pointing his finger at me. "Call whoever you need to call. We want the trip reinstated immediately." I stood my ground, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm not giving expensive gifts to people who don't respect my husband or me. The trip is canceled, and that's final." Rachel's face contorted with rage. "You know what? Don't bother coming to my wedding at all. You're not invited anymore." "Rachel," James started to say, but she cut him off. "Shut up. This is all your fault. Ever since Amber married you, she's changed. She used to be fun. She used to be normal." I took a deep breath, my voice coming out surprisingly steady. "You ought to talk about money. Fine, let's talk about the $10,000 I gave you for this wedding." Rachel's face went pale so quickly I thought she might faint. Mom and Dad stopped their angry muttering. "That's right," I continued. $10,000 that I could legally demand back right now since you've uninvited me from the wedding. That's how gifts work, Rachel. They can be rescinded if the occasion they're meant for no longer applies to the gift giver." You wouldn't," Rachel stammered, her previous bravado completely gone. "No, I wouldn't," I agreed. "You can keep the money. Consider it your wedding gift from your horrible, unfun sister who doesn't want to come to your wedding anyway." "But the Maldives," Rachel's voice cracked. "The Maldives was never yours to begin with," I said firmly. "It was a surprise gift from the man you couldn't even be bothered to invite to your wedding. The man you've all treated like an outsider for years. Well, congratulations. You finally succeeded in pushing us both away completely." Rachel's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. "But I dreamed about the Maldives my whole life. It's not fair." Mom and Dad immediately wrapped their arms around her, like they always had when we were kids and she didn't get her way. They shot me venomous looks as they guided her toward the door. I watched them leave, coddling my sobbing sister between them, and felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just exhaustion. The door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the house was quiet again. James came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I'm so tired," I whispered. "Tired of their arrogance. Tired of them only thinking about themselves. Tired of them treating us, like this." "I know," he said softly, kissing the top of my head. I turned to face him, a small smile forming on my lips despite everything. "You know what? Let's do something with that refunded money, something for us." "What did you have in mind?" "We've been talking about getting a new car. $20,000 would make a nice down payment." James grinned. "I might have been looking at some options already. Want to go car shopping?" 2 weeks later, we were driving home in our brand new hybrid SUV. It was beautiful, practical, and most importantly, it was ours. A symbol of our life together, our priorities, our future. As I ran my hand over the pristine dashboard, I couldn't help but feel we'd made the right choice. The day of Rachel's wedding came and went. I spent it deliberately busy. James and I took our new car for a long drive along the coast, had lunch at a quiet seaside restaurant, and tried our best not to think about what was happening back in town. But that evening, after we returned home, I couldn't help myself. I opened Instagram and went to Rachel's page. The wedding photos were already up, professionally shot, carefully filtered, perfectly posed. As I scrolled through them, I noticed something. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. In every photo, even the candid shots, she looked distracted, unsettled, like someone trying too hard to prove they were having the time of their life. 2 days later, my Aunt Susan called. She'd always been my favorite relative. Mom's younger sister, but completely different from her in every way that mattered. "I need to tell you something about the wedding," she said, her voice serious. "Your mother made a speech, one of those passive-aggressive masterpieces she's so good at. She went on about how families should stick together, how some people become too caught up in their own lives to remember their responsibilities. Then she said something about greed destroying family bonds. I felt my chest tighten. Let me guess, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. Oh, honey, it was about as subtle as a brick through a window. The whole room was uncomfortable. Even some of Mark's family were whispering, asking what was going on. I took a deep breath and told her everything. The uninvited husband, the Maui trip, Rachel's tantrum, all of it. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "You did the right thing," she said finally, her voice firm. "I've watched for years as they've treated James like an outsider. It's not right, and it's not your fault. Your mother and Rachel, they've always been like this. Always had to have everything their way." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you, Aunt Susan. You don't know how much that means to me." I spent a lot of time sitting in our backyard watching the sunset after we hung up. There, James discovered me and produced 2 wine glasses. He took a seat next to me and said, "What are your thoughts?" I took a sip of my drink and remarked, "I was just thinking about family, about how sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. Do you think you'll ever reconcile with them?" To be honest, I'm not sure. Perhaps in the future, if they can actually recognize their mistakes and make amends. However, I'm not going to hold my breath or pursue them. James grabbed my hand as he reached over. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." I returned his squeeze while reflecting on our progress. A crisis might occasionally serve as a reminder of what matters most and who truly has your back. James was not the outsider, the one who didn't belong, as my family may have believed. True family values, loyalty, respect, and understanding had been demonstrated by him. I was quite happy as we sat in our backyard and watched the sky change from orange to purple to deep blue. In the driveway was our brand new vehicle, a representation of our future together. Our house felt more tranquil than ever, even though it was quieter now that my family wasn't causing so much trouble.